I'm going to start with something that might make you uncomfortable. Most drivers lose their case before they ever see a courtroom. Not because they're guilty, not because the evidence is overwhelming, but because they talked, because they reacted emotionally, because they didn't understand the game that was being played the moment those red and blue lights lit up their rearview mirror. Let me ask you something directly, and I want you to answer honestly. Have you ever been pulled over and felt that rush of panic, even if you knew you hadn't done anything wrong? Drop your experience in the comments. Tell me what happened. What did you say? What did the officer say? And most importantly, how did you feel in that moment? Share it below, because what you think happened and what legally happened are often two very different things. And as we go deeper into this, you're going to start realizing how much of the traffic stop process most people misunderstand. I've spent years studying traffic law, sitting in courtrooms, watching body cam footage, talking to attorneys, and analyzing how cases are built and destroyed. And I can tell you with confidence that the traffic stop is not a casual conversation. It's not a friendly roadside chat. It's a structured, legally strategic encounter designed to gather information, establish control, and potentially build a case. And here's the part that most drivers never fully grasp. The traffic stop doesn't start when the officer reaches your window. It starts the second they decide to pull you over. Long before they step out of their patrol car, they're already observing you. Your speed, your lane position, whether you hesitated when they got behind you, whether you made sudden movements. They are forming impressions, and those impressions matter more than most people realize. People assume traffic stops are about tickets. Sometimes they are, but often they're about something else entirely. They're about fishing for indicators. Is the driver nervous? Are their hands shaking? Is there an odor? Are there inconsistent answers? Officers are trained to notice patterns. They're trained to look for behavioral cues that might justify expanding the stop. And this is where things get dangerous for the average driver. When an officer approaches your window and says, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" It sounds casual, it sounds conversational, but legally, it's a trap. If you say yes and admit to speeding, you've just handed them evidence. If you say no and they have you on radar, they may interpret that as evasive. Either way, you're responding under pressure. Here's something most people don't know. You are required to provide your license, registration, and proof of insurance in most states. That's it. You are not required to provide a detailed explanation of your evening. You are not required to answer investigative questions unrelated to the reason for the stop. But drivers talk. They overshare. They try to be helpful, they try to appear cooperative, and in doing so, they often give away the very details that later appear in the police report as admissions. I've seen cases where a simple speeding stop turned into a DUI investigation because the driver casually mentioned they were coming from dinner. That's it. Just that phrase. The officer asked where dinner was. The driver said a restaurant that served alcohol. The officer asked if they had anything to drink. The driver said, "Just one." And from that moment forward, the entire tone of the stop shifted. Now let's slow this down and think about psychology for a moment. Why do people talk so much during traffic stops? Fear, social conditioning. We're raised to respect authority, to answer questions when asked. Silence feels suspicious. But legally, silence is not guilt. It's a constitutional protection. And officers know that most people won't exercise it. Another thing police don't advertise is how much weight courts give to something called reasonable suspicion. It's a lower standard than probable cause. It doesn't require proof, it requires articulable facts. And those facts can be surprisingly subjective. Nervousness, avoiding eye contact, shaky hands, conflicting statements, all of these get written into reports. You might think, but everyone is nervous during a traffic stop. You're right, but in a courtroom, it's not about common sense. It's about what's documented. Let's talk about vehicle searches because this is where people make catastrophic mistakes. If an officer asks, "Do you mind if I take a look inside your car?" That is a request for consent. If you say yes, you have just waived one of the strongest protections you had. You don't need to justify refusing. You don't need to argue. A simple, calm statement like, "I don't consent to any searches," is enough. Notice the wording. Not no, not why, not "Do you have a warrant?" Just a clear refusal. If they have probable cause, they're going to search anyway. Your consent doesn't matter. But if they don't have probable cause and you consent, you've handed them the key. And here's something that shocks people. Even if you're completely innocent, consenting to a search can create problems. Imagine a friend left something in your car. Imagine there's an old item you forgot about. Consent opens doors that might otherwise have remained closed. Now let's talk about recording. In most states, you have the right to record police during a traffic stop as long as you're not interfering. But how you do it matters. Calmly placing your phone on the dashboard is very different from waving it in someone's face. The tone you set affects the entire interaction. Officers are human. Some are professional and measured. Some are reactive. Your goal is not to win an argument on the side of the road. Your goal is to survive the encounter legally intact. Another critical misunderstanding involves stepping out of the vehicle. Many drivers think officers need a special reason to order them out. In reality, under established Supreme Court precedent, officers can generally order drivers and passengers out during a lawful traffic stop for safety reasons. Arguing about that on the roadside rarely ends well. That doesn't mean you've lost your rights. It means you need to pick your battles. The roadside is not the courtroom. Let me give you a realistic scenario that plays out more often than you think. A driver is pulled over for a broken taillight. They're irritated because they didn't know it was broken. The officer asks routine questions. The driver responds with sarcasm. The officer senses attitude. The stop extends. Backup arrives. A K9 unit is requested. Now we're no longer talking about a taillight. We're talking about a full vehicle sniff and a 45-minute delay. Was that legal? Possibly. Was it avoidable? Often? Yes. Your demeanor matters more than your ego in that moment. Here's something else that's rarely discussed openly. Traffic enforcement is sometimes used strategically. Minor infractions create lawful reasons to initiate contact. That contact can lead to broader investigations. This isn't conspiracy thinking. It's procedural reality. The system allows officers to enforce minor violations strictly, and because almost every driver commits minor infractions occasionally, enforcement becomes selective. Now let's address something uncomfortable. Not all traffic stops are fair. Bias exists, mistakes happen, overreach happens, but your response determines whether the situation escalates or stabilizes. You have the right to ask, calmly, "Am I free to leave?" If the answer is yes, leave. If the answer is no, you're being detained. At that point, you should reduce your speech, not increase it. And here's a crucial distinction that most people never understand. Being detained is not the same as being arrested. During detention, officers are investigating. The more you talk, the more material they have to work with. Courtrooms are filled with cases built on roadside statements. Let's talk about breath tests for a moment. Refusing a roadside breath test is different from refusing a chemical test after arrest in many states. Administrative penalties, like automatic license suspension, can apply. These laws vary by state, and misunderstanding them can cost you your license before you ever argue your case. Drivers often think in black and white. If I didn't do anything wrong, I have nothing to worry about. That's not how the system works. The system works on documentation, procedure, and narrative. The police report is often the first draft of your case story. If your words support that narrative, undoing it later becomes extremely difficult. I've seen defense attorneys dismantle traffic stops because officers made procedural mistakes. I've also seen cases collapse for defendants because they admitted too much too early. What police don't openly emphasize is that their job during a stop is information gathering. Your job is information protection. That doesn't mean hostility, it means discipline. You can be polite without being talkative. You can be respectful without being submissive. You can assert rights without escalating tension. And here's something that might surprise you. Judges often evaluate how reasonable each party acted. Calm drivers who clearly, politely assert rights tend to appear more credible than drivers who argue roadside legal theory. Let's go deeper into how officers think during stops. They're evaluating threat levels. Are your hands visible? Are you reaching under seats? Are you making sudden movements? Before any legal discussion even begins, safety is the dominant lens. If you want the stop to go smoothly, Keep your hands visible, follow simple commands, and avoid sudden gestures. This isn't about surrendering rights. It's about reducing unnecessary friction. Another mistake travelers make, especially those driving rental cars or traveling across state lines, is assuming their home state's rules apply everywhere. Search standards, recording laws, and traffic codes differ. Ignorance doesn't pause enforcement. And here's where things get even more complex. Body cameras don't always capture everything. Dash cams don't always tell the full story. Angles matter. Audio clarity matters. Tone matters. The footage that goes to court may not reflect how it felt in real time. That's why your conduct must be consistent regardless of whether a camera is present. Let me circle back to something I hinted at earlier. Most traffic stop cases aren't won with dramatic courtroom speeches. They're won or lost in the first 5 minutes on the roadside. If you remember nothing else from this, remember this principle. Slow down your speech, shorten your answers, control your emotions. You're not there to prove a point. You're there to protect your future. And if you've ever left a traffic stop thinking, I should have handled that differently, you're not alone. Almost everyone feels that way at some point. The difference between panic and preparation is knowledge. So next time those lights appear behind you, take a breath. Signal. Pull over safely. Keep your hands visible. Provide required documents. Decline unnecessary questions politely. Do not consent to searches if you don't want to. Ask if you're free to leave when appropriate, and most importantly, don't let adrenaline control your mouth. Because what police don't want you to fully appreciate is how much power your own words have. Use them carefully. And if you've learned something new today, think back to that question at the beginning. How did you feel during your last stop? Would you handle it differently now? I'll be reading your comments.